Okay, great. We've got Rick Healy is up next, and Rick he's been a member of our club for 7, 8 years?
More than that, probably.
12?
17.
I started in like 2003, 7?
Okay,
It was 2007.
okay, and
I have to look at my SSA card number since.
and I was looking at the number of flights you did this year, whether you were in the front seat or doing BFRs or lessons or check rides, and it was something in the neighborhood of 100 and...
It was no, I don't think I did that many this year, but a lot of it was me just sitting there doing the hours of boredom with a few seconds of air.
So Rick he's a rising star in the CFIG arena, and he's a star, and he's got a lot of nuts and bolts experience with doing VFRs, doing check flights, and doing lessons. So Rick is going to talk to us about checklists. Let's give Rick a round of applause. Thank you.
All right. For this kind of flight preparation, how many of you just raise your hands? All of you guys we're all old, so don't stand up. How many of you check the weather before you decide to come up to the airport to fly? Okay, when you're getting ready to leave, how many of you have a written checklist of what you want to bring with you to the airport? So a lot fewer people. I have a go bag too. I have actually a go crate that stays in the back of my car. But I have a written checklist on top of that go crate that I go through and make sure I have everything I want. When you arrive to the airport prepared, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable and ready to fly your airplane. So we don't want you to show up at the airport like that. What am I doing? What did I forget? What am I going to bring with me? So by using checklists, not just a pre-departure checklist, we have a bunch of other checklists. Ron has an extensive checklist because I've flown with Ron a lot. So what we want you to show up with is looking like this. We want you to be in a Zen state, so ready to go, totally confident that you've got all your bases covered and you're ready to fly your aircraft. Okay? This is going to be a mercifully short presentation, so we'll leave extra time for Sebastian. Okay. I'm missing a picture there.
Maybe you wanted this picture.
There we go. Say checklist. We don't need no stinking checklists, but few of them are good. Next slide.
Did you want to go back to this one or no?
Go back up. That one. I don't know why I put that one in there. Okay. First thing you want to do before you've decided to fly, before you even get to your pre-departure checklist. How am I? Before I even decide I want to fly that day. Do the Unsafe Checklist. So, pretty self-explanatory there. Everybody can read, I'm hoping. All right? So, go do that on yourself before you even start to think about flying. Am I good for the day? Next one. So then, there's your next checklist. Say, relaxed Zen flight begins with your checklist. So your pre-departure checklist, when you get to the airport, you've got your aircraft pre-flight checklist, which should be written, and you should use a written checklist. Don't just run off your head. So that's a invitation to forgetting and missing something critical. Say you're in the cockpit pre-takeoff checklist, all your different things that you're going to check, and your landing checklist. A lot of checklists, and it's good to have them written down. Use them. Should stick them up in the cockpit if you don't have it, so you have a little sticker or something, so you go through everything. And next. Okay, there's my pre-departure checklist that I use. So there's my pre-departure. I check everything. I make sure do I have my battery? Is it charged? Do I have my flight deck? Say, Very important if you're going cross-country, your in-flight elimination systems. Okay? Food and water, clothing appropriate for the flight. Are you going to go wave flying? You want to have extra clothes with you so you're warm. Next. So once you're at the airport, get to the aircraft that you're going to be flying. Do a pre-flight, thorough pre-flight. Again, use the written checklist. Don't just try to go by road. That was the biggest thing I found when I've been teaching, since I've been teaching up in Wurtsboro. Their pre-flights on their aircraft on students that were continuing were terrible. They didn't use a checklist. They had no system of moving around the aircraft. It was just like, So, big thing. And for those of you who don't have your pilot's license yet, if there are any of you, using the written checklist is a major fail point for the DPEs. If you don't use a written checklist, they are going to give you a discontinuation on it more. It's a major stress area for the FAA right now. All right, again, a personal checklist. Ronnie has one that is a little spiral notebook that's probably 2 pages long. Not quite that bad. But does he have his glasses? Do you need glasses when you're flying to look at your instruments? Do you bring them with you? So it can make things difficult if you're going cross country and you can't see what you want to see. Say meds, phone, etc., etc. Everything you want to have with you on the flight. Have a checklist for it so you have it, and once you get in the plane, you're good. Next. Again, check yourself again. What happened on the way to the airport? Maybe you had a bad drive up, you had to deal with some idiot that got you PO'd, you got to the airport, maybe somebody was stealing the glider you wanted to fly. Check yourself again, make sure you're psychologically good to go, and for most of us it's a 2-hour deal from when we first left for the airport till we're sitting in the cockpit ready to fly. A lot can happen in that 2 hours. Okay? Next. Okay, this is what happens when you use Keynote and you switch to PowerPoint and have it translated. Everything goes all out of alignment. So I'm an Apple guy, so what can I say? Okay, these are just some of your standard in-cockpit checklists. Say the A, B, C, C, D, D, you can all read it. It's not quite lined up right, but you guys all know that checklist. Next one. Another common one, this is more used in the UK and Europe. Say, Boris, you probably know this one well. Okay, also a good checklist. I saw there's like 20 million acronyms out there that people use for their checklists. And they're all great as long as they cover what they need to cover and you actually use them. Okay, next. Your landing checklist. I use Fustall no matter what glider I'm flying because we do have some flapped gliders. So I include that every time I'm flying. Okay? Biggest thing here on all your checklists. Don't just read or say the mnemonic you have and robotically click through it. Touch whatever you're supposed to be checking as a mental reinforcement that that thing is in the position and the condition it is supposed to be in. Don't just like, okay, everything's done. I haven't really checked anything, but I said everything. Saying it doesn't check it. Do I see a hand? Yes.
I was just going to add one other thing. Look and touch. Because you would be the first person to touch the air brakes instead of the flaps.
Oh yeah, I actually did that when I was doing a check ride up at Wurtsboro with the first time. I was adjusting something, but it wasn't the dive brakes. I forget which handle I had in my hand. It was the right hand, and it was a right general place, and I was, so why is my glide path not changing? And then I finally realized I'm not on damn brakes.
We saw one guy one time, I think it was flying an ASW 15 or something, wheel up and down because he thinks he's got the air brake down.
So I use it for when I'm on tow and I release, thanks to, I forget who took the picture of me with my wheel down in the LS4, I use arty-arty now when I release. Release, turn, retract, thermal.
There you go.
So I include that in that's another checklist I have now, because I flew around for probably a good 45 minutes with that wheel down. I was doing great, even with the wheel down. Saying a wonderful picture, by the way. I saw it's on my computer. All right, next. So while you're in the aircraft waiting on tow, visualize any emergencies that you might come up. Say, think about them. What would you do if, now visualization, there's actually been a study where visualizing an action or a skill is only 1% less effective than actually physically practicing that skill. That 1%, and that's visualizing. This gives you an even better way to visualize, because you're sitting in the cockpit. You have the controls in your hand. You're adding in extra sensory input to the visualization. Think about what you would do. What would happen if the rope break? Move your stick. Think of rope break 500 feet, 50 feet. What am I going to do? Say, move the controls. You're sitting there not doing anything anyway. You should have, if you did all your checklists, by the time you are sitting waiting to be hooked up on the grid, you shouldn't have to be thinking about anything else other than eventualities. Everything should have been checked already. All right? You're ready to go, and you know it because you left nothing to chance. You checked everything. Okay? Next slide. So this is how we want to start all our flights. Nice, fat, and happy, ready to go. And this is how we want to end them. And this is because we used our checklist. Next slide. All right, that's it for me. Emergency shorts. Okay, hold on.
You went so fast, so it'd be interesting to see how many people have found something significant that could have impacted the flight in their pre-flight. So something that could have really caused a big problem.
I have.
So most people, right? So just imagine if you hadn't done that pre-flight, how things could have worked out.
And Rick, I just want to also add, I think going through checklists and that is great, but the one mistake I've made with the dive brakes on the 134 was that I was in, ready to go, and then had to jump out, go help somebody else, and that's a problem. So I think just going through that checklist again for any reason.
Oh,
it's
anytime you're interrupted or
Yeah.
Do the whole thing again.
just start over.
I have a copy of Ron's checklist if somebody wants it.
Say Ron can post that.
Do you get a royalty, Ron? Or
Yes.
I was just going to add one more thing, not so
you
much
mind
for the
sharing?
pilot, but for the general population, and that is if you see somebody going through a checklist, stay away from them, do not talk to them. Because that's, interrupting somebody while they're going through that.
Again, that's a favorite thing the DPEs will do to you during your test. They will interrupt you during your checklist just to see what you do. And if someone interrupts you during your checklist, don't be shy about being rude. Just say, "Not now. Come see me in a few minutes." So you don't need to engage everyone that wants to engage you. Cookie.
Did you do a glider assembly checklist? I see guys assemble a glider.
Well, yeah,
No
that's part of your pre-flight pilot operating handbook. That should be included in a positive control check, and all of that should be listed in that. I mean, I can't go into detail about every possible list you could use, but it should be on your checklist.
The other one knows, what do they call them, mnemonics, those CB, SID, CB.
Yeah.
I find when I was teaching, my students made up their own stuff. Like the letter C, but they came up with a C.
To me, if it works for you, if it's a mnemonic that you can remember and it covers the bases, there was one I saw in Australia. It was something like Havoc, CBBE, or something like that. I didn't really explore everything that it covered, but wherever you go, there's different mnemonics that people use. But the key is, does it cover all the bases, and are you actually checking and not just reciting what you've heard, you know, or what you know?
Going to channel Tony Benson, is it possible for the checklist to be too long? Have you ever seen somebody show up with the CB, SID, GUMPS, this, and as Tony Benson said, the glider is as complicated as a pair of pliers.
I remember that
And
one.
they've got an 852 point checklist.
I think that's up to the individual. If it would be probably might be too long for me, but if it makes them feel more secure about making their flight, have at it. I don't have a problem with it.
And having multiple checklists breaks it up. You know, having your before you leave for the airport checklist, assembly checklist, before you close the canopy checklist. You don't want to have 800 things right before you close the canopy necessarily.
Go ahead, Joe.
I haven't seen Ron's checklist, but I have a feeling we probably look pretty much alike. I've got a single space, 2-column checklist with different sections for assembly.
He just has a little one of those little roll pads with a spiral.
So I print those off, and in a contest especially, I've got a little line out there. I'll check them off one at a time.
Yep.
What that allows me to do, we're talking about being interrupted. If I get interrupted, or if I get to an item and it's not right, I just skip that line and keep going.
Okay.
So yeah, I have a ton of items I have to check off, but if I miss 2 or 3 of them, I go back and say, okay, do I have a green board now? Is everything checked off? So I don't have to start over again with a 430 line checklist if I get interrupted.
Yeah, but like I said, I don't ever hesitate to just tell someone if I'm pre-flighting, just
That's
pre-flighting.
better.
I'll talk to you in 5 minutes. Come
I
back.
like long checklists because I don't want to have to worry when I get in the cockpit if
Yeah.
I've forgotten something. But I won't have to go through the whole thing all over again because somebody
Yeah.
had stopped me in the middle of it. So you got to go through the glider.
All right. Anything else?
One more thing, I think the pre-landing checklist should be by heart, you shouldn't
Yes.
read it at all. The rest of them you can actually read
But
it
it's
all.
good to have it. Few stalls should be easy enough to remember, but it's not a bad idea to just have few stall written there to remind you to use it. So it doesn't have to be written out, just the acronym that is there, and if okay, got to go through that, I'm about to land.
Like for Rob, I use the one on top hat.
There you go. Use your electronic checklist.
A controversy I come up with when I was teaching a lot, especially from the airplane world and maybe even the jetliner world. What we tend to do, they would call a do list. I'm talking about a pre-flight inspection. And a lot of power guys, even my power instructors say, no, you just go around the plane and look at everything, like from memory or whatever. And then you bring out the list and say, yeah, I checked that, I checked that, I checked that. My feeling as a glider instructor, a glider's pretty simple. I wanted my students to have a do list. Number 1, check it. Number 2, check it. Not just kind of walk around aimlessly and then go back to the list. But have you come across that? Where power guys don't want to do
Most of the, like I said, up at Worksboro, where really the only place I've been teaching, the pre-flights were very haphazard, and I would just say I wasn't happy. So.
Just one other thing too, when you talked about the flight test, I've had very few students fail the flight test over the years, but there's been a couple. And the one guy failed because he did not do a pre-flight with a checklist. The examiner said if I give him additional instruction, that she would re-examine him. He did the pre-flight again without a checklist.
Slow learner.
And then failed, and then he was a lawyer, so he raised his snip. The examiner immediately called the FAA and said, guess what's coming your way in the next hour? And we never saw the guy again. But, you know, the examiner's looking at you. So go out there with that printed list and, you know, but you should do that all the time.
Yeah, but that is a area of, where the FAA is saying, we want to see checklist usage, and we want to see the checklist and the usage. It's a stress area right now.
time
I'll
for
add,
one
Bob had a
more.
question, and then I'll get to you,
Okay,
Boris.
2 questions.
Observation as a student, when I first started, I'd write my own checklist, but I'd also add information like, what's the stall speed, and things like that, so I could refresh my memory every time, even if it was just before getting into the plane.
Like I said, whatever works for you, as long as you're covering the basics that will keep the aircraft flying. If you wanna add in extra stuff, I don't have a problem with it. But like Bob said, you can make your checklist too big, or real longer than it really needs to be, and as you get more comfortable as a pilot, you'll find you start subtracting out the things that are the extras. Okay, Boris, real quick, I gotta go.
Yeah, just to add to like touching things and having input, there's also a psychological trick I think that once is you go through your checklist and you try to find what's wrong with your glider today. It's very good if you do your walk around as well, because most people you get to find faults, right? We all like to find faults, and others a lot easier than we say, oh, it's just good. So I don't know, was it Kai Gertzen or one of those books where he said he does his pre-flight and looks at his plane and thinks, I want to find what's wrong with the plane today. And if you don't find anything wrong with it, you use your checklist, but you think, okay, let's see what's wrong with it today. You're much more thorough than just.
No more questions, Rob said we're done.
Well, yeah, we're running a little bit over. Thank you, Rick.
So it was fun to get out.
No, I mean, what a great presentation on checklists. It spurred questions.
Yeah,
What,
that's right.
that's the mark of a good presentation.